While we learned to fight their machines, the Martians remade the world in their own image. Their second wave of attack was biological. A silent, insidious invasion began around each landing cylinder. They deployed the red weed. At first, the weed was a botanical curiosity, a crimson, almost blood-colored vegetation that spread at a visible pace, supplanting the familiar English flora. It grew in dense, tangled mats, covering the ground, climbing trees, and draping itself over the ruins of houses. But its most terrifying property was its affinity for water. It clogged rivers and streams, turning them into sluggish crimson arteries. The Thames, from Kew to Richmond, became a silent, stagnant swamp of alien growth. I went out with a scouting party to observe it near the original Woking pit. The air there was heavy, humid, and with a strange chemical sharpness. The weed rendered the world in shades of red and gray. The only sound was a soft, relentless rustle of the growing vegetation. The growth presented a vision of a new earth, an alien landscape. This was replacement, a form of terraforming so aggressive and swift it was horrifying to behold. This life form was a biohazard altering the chemistry of the soil and water. It was digesting England. This new threat spurred a different kind of war, one fought with microscopes and beakers. Morozova, recognizing the existential threat, commissioned every chemist and biologist she could find, establishing makeshift laboratories in the basements of Manchester's university buildings. Morozova tasked them with understanding this alien life and finding a way to kill it. I spent weeks in those labs, documenting the frustrating work. The air was a sharp cocktail of acrid fumes from electrical experiments and the cloying, sweet smell of the captured weed samples, which quickly decayed unless kept in a specialized nutrient solution. The chemists worked, their faces pale under the gaslights, their lab coats stained with alien chlorophyll. They also tackled the black smoke problem, another of their terrible weapons. The black smoke was a heavy, inky vapor that rolled across the ground, suffocating all animal life it touched. Analysis showed it was a complex compound of elements new to our science, but its delivery method was simple to fusion. This led to the scientific war's first small victory, the creation of a functional, if crude, respirator. They were ugly things, masks made of treated leather and thick canvas, with a filter canister filled with charcoal and layers of chemically treated cloth. They allowed our scouts and work crews to operate on the verges of Martian-held territory, but they were a defensive measure. The breakthrough against the red weed came after a month of painstaking tests. A young chemist, a man named Walter Finch, was running a series of tests on the weed's reaction to common industrial effluents. He stared as he introduced a sample of the highly alkaline runoff from a nearby soap and gas works, and the weed disintegrated. The cells burst, dissolving into a grayish sludge. The key was alkalinity. The industrial waste, a caustic cocktail from soap and gas production, was highly alkaline. The red weed, it turned out, had evolved in a planetary environment with a vastly different pH. In the presence of a strong base, its cellular integrity collapsed. The discovery sent a surge of hope through the labs. We had a weapon against their terraforming. The solution was crude soap, the grimy, caustic effluent of our own industrial heartlands. We were going to fight their alien biology with the toxic runoff of our own civilization. Intelligence gathered by daring scouts in their new charcoal filter mask confirmed our fears and presented an opportunity. The Martians were using the original landing pit on Horsell Common, now a vast crater shrouded in a dense blanket of red weed, as a primary assembly yard where they assembled new tripods shipped in pieces from Mars. The pit was their factory, their beachhead, and their most critical vulnerability. A direct assault was suicidal. The concentration of Martian forces and the choking weed made it a fortress. But Morozova and Morgan Bell conceived of an industrial delivery. "You'll wisely, Spur." Bell growled, jabbing a grease-stained finger at a railway map spread across a trestle table in the crew office. The air was thick with the smell of hot oil and steam. "It's a decommissioned line, used to serve the rifle ranges. The Army had ceased it using it years ago, but the tracks remained, overgrown but yet solid. It runs right to the common's edge, less than half a mile from the pit." His plan was audacious. They would load a train with the deadliest products of Britain's chemical industry, tons of quicklime, caustic soda, and every other highly alkaline substance they could manufacture or requisition. They would send this train, a rolling chemical bomb, hurtling down the old spur and crash it directly into the Martian assembly pit. "It's a one-way trip," Bell said, his expression grim. "The trip is fatal for any driver. We'll have to get it up to speed and then jump for it." But a new problem arose. A young engineer in Bell's team, poring over old survey maps, found a critical flaw.
"The Brookwood Bridge. The spur crosses the canal there. It's an old timber and iron bridge, sir. They never rated it for this kind of weight, particularly at speed."
For a day, the flaw seemed to scuttle the plan. Time precluded building a new bridge, but Bell, a man who thought in steel, had a different idea. He looked at the map, then at the reports of Martian destruction in the south. "There's a collapsed iron works near Guildford," he said, a fierce light in his eyes. "The Martians hit it last month. There'll be twisted girders, steel plate, scrap iron everywhere. We send a crew down there, cut what we need, and haul it back. We'll reinforce the bridge, build a brute force steel cage right under it, just enough to hold for the 10 seconds it takes for the train to cross." They forged a solution from desperation and scrap. They needed volunteers for the train crew. Every man in the workshop stepped forward. Bell chose 3 of his best, and then announced he would be driving the engine himself. The men around him nodded. They had expected it. "It's my plan," he said. The men fell silent. "My railway, my train. I'll see it home." I watched them prepare the crew special, as the men had nicknamed it. Crews loaded the flatbed cars with canvas sacks of white powder, tanker cars filled with foul-smelling liquids. The engine was a behemoth, a heavy freight locomotive chosen for its power and weight. It looked like what it was, a piece of industrial machinery repurposed for a terrible and necessary task. These were railwaymen, going to war and doing the most dangerous job of their lives. The crew's special midnight run was a journey into the heart of the occupied territory. I chronicled it from the tense, crackling wireless reports in Bell's own account, delivered afterwards in his characteristic understated manner. They traveled with their lights extinguished, a phantom train sliding through a dead landscape. The territory south of Reading was Martian country now. The Martian weed had erased the familiar English countryside, replaced by the red wheat's eerie crimson glow and the skeletal silhouettes of burned-out farms. The constant threat was the hum of a tripod patrol, the sweep of a heat ray over a distant ridge. They reached the damaged Brookwood Bridge hours before dawn. In the pre-dawn darkness, Bell's reinforcement crew had done their work. They had wrestled salvaged girders from the Guildford ruins into place, creating a crude but immensely strong cradle of steel beneath the old timbered trestles. The cradle was an ugly, brutally functional monument to industrial improvisation. Bell eased the heavy train onto the bridge. The timbers groaned in protest, the sound loud in the unnatural stillness. The entire structure sagged, but the scrap iron cage held firm. They crossed at a crawl, the mission's fate resting on a few tons of scavenged steel. They cleared the bridge, and the men let out a collective, shuddering breath of relief. The final stretch was a straight, gentle downgrade towards the common. This was it. Bell opened throttle wide. The firemen shoveled coal with a desperate rhythmic fury, pushing the steam well past its safety limits. The locomotive, unburdened by any need for preservation, surged forward, its pistons pounding with a frantic, powerful rhythm. The train gathered speed, roaring through the darkness at a suicidal pace. Through the locomotive's front window, a hellish crimson glow pulsed from beyond the trees. The Martian pit. "No!" Bell roared over the engine's shriek, the train hurtling over at 80 miles an hour, and the end of the line rushing towards them. He and his crew jumped, leaping from the speeding locomotive into the thorny embrace of a gorse thicket. They hit the ground, hard, bruised and battered, and scrambled for cover. The crew special, riderless and committed to its path, screamed on. It hit the line's end, ripped the buffers, and plowed a massive furrow through the earth. It soared into the air for a moment before crashing nose down into the Martian crater's center. The impact was cataclysmic. The tanker cars ruptured, spraying their caustic contents over everything. The sacks of quicklime burst, blanking the arena in a choking white dust. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The water that the red weed carved became the catalyst for a massive chemical fire. Quicklime and water create intense heat, and the caustic soda dissolved everything it touched. A horrifying, searing roar erupted as a chemical inferno consumed the pit. A pillar of white corrosive steam erupted, carrying with it a sound that was organic, a high-pitched, ululating shriek of alien pain. Through the steam, Bell and his men witnessed Martian machines melting, their metal skins dissolving like salt in water. They witnessed the red weed blacken and wither, collapsing into a foul-smelling sludge. They had scoured the factory from the face of the planet with a tidal wave of industrial poison, turning the Martians' own terraformed environment into a chemical trap. The act was a victory of profound and terrible ingenuity. For a week, a strange and deceptive quiet fell over the front. We had hurt them badly, and they had withdrawn to consider their wounds. The quiet was a deceptive hope. We had shown them our true weapons, and they were taking the time to understand them before responding in kind. The Martian response came swiftly, and when it did, the response was proof of their chilling intelligence. The Martians adapted, learning their lesson. Having broken our armies and sunk our navy, they recognized the attack on the Woking Pit was different. The attack on the Woking Pit was an assault on their biology and industry, delivered by a system they had previously ignored. They adapted. Their entire strategy shifted with stunning speed. The advance northward slowed to a halt. The terror strikes on towns and villages ceased. A new, far more terrifying pattern of destruction emerged. One following Captain Morozova's own logic with horrifying accuracy. A wireless report came in from Sheffield. A tripod had destroyed the country's 3 largest steelworks, targeting only the foundries and leaving the city itself standing. They leveled the Bessemer converters, melted the rolling mills, and collapsed the smokestacks. Another report from South Wales. The Martians targeted the Rhondda Valley's coal pits, the source of high-grade steam coal that powered our railways and factories. They used their heat rays to collapse the pit heads, sealing the mines and trapping hundreds of men below ground. They were killing our capacity to make steam. Next, they came for the chemical plants in Cheshire, the factories that had produced the alkaline compounds for the crew special. They pulverized them. The message was brutally clear. You have shown us your weapons. Now we will take them from you. They became industrial saboteurs in addition to conquerors. They were waging a total war on our ability to resist, striking at the source of our strength. Each devastating attack was a reply in a language we now understood completely. The brief elation we felt after the Woking victory evaporated, replaced by a profound dread. We had shown them our heart, and now they were coming to cut it out. The pressure was immense, the work relentless. We were always moving, setting up new command posts in commandeered schools and abandoned factories, staying one step ahead of the Martians' new strategy. The days became a continuous blur of maps, casualty reports, and a constant, desperate effort to keep the trains running. Sleep was a luxury, snatched in chairs or on floors. One evening, during a forced halt while a Martian patrol swept through the valley below, I found myself sharing a railway maintenance shed with Morgan Bell. The air was cold and smelled of diesel and rust. A single lantern cast long, dancing shadows. Through a crack in the wooden wall, we could see the distant, gilding silhouette of a tripod, its single red eyes scanning the landscape. I was there to interview Bell, to get his crew special's official account for the Chronicle, but the formalities seemed absurd in that moment. We were two exhausted men hiding in the dark. I offered him my thermos, which contained a weak, lukewarm tea. He took it with a grateful nod, his grease-blackened hands wrapping around the small cup. He was quiet for several minutes, sipping the tea and watching the distant machine. The foreman, stripped of the noise and fury of his workshop, seemed a different man, older, wearier. "My Lily," he said, his voice soft. "My daughter, she's 9. Her aunt in Cole has her. I sent her a postcard last week. Drew a picture of a locomotive on it. She likes engines." He stared into his cup. All this running about, all this noise. At the end of it all I can think about is whether she's warm, whether she's frightened. I just want to sit with her in the garden again and listen to the 6 o'clock express go by. You could set your watch by that train. He fell silent, leaving his words to hang in the cold air. The pride in a well-run timetable, the simple, profound hope of seeing his daughter again. He fought for something more immediate than empire or king and country. He fought for the 6 o'clock express. He fought for Lily's garden. I told him about my wife, about the chaos at Waterloo, about the uncertainty that was a constant dull ache in my chest. He listened, nodding thoughtfully. In that cold, greasy shed, beyond our titles of writer and foreman, we were two men who had lost the ordinary. We were two men who had lost the ordinary, precious things that made up life. For me, the chronicler of grand strategies and technological battles, the conversation was a clarifying moment. I documented the war of machines, of systems, of chemicals and steel. Morgan Bell, with his simple, heartfelt words, reminded me of the true stakes. Our fight was for the right to a life that was wonderfully boring and predictable, for timetables and tea, and sitting in a garden with the people we loved. That was the prize. That was everything. The breakthrough, like all the crucial turns in this war, came from an observation. A single detail obsessed Captain Morozova. the way the tripods moved. She spent days poring over reconnaissance sketches and my own written accounts, particularly the detailed report from the Medway battle. She fixated on the line about the tripod shuddering from the underwater explosion, how it had struggled for balance. We were in the new headquarters, a cavernous, disused textile mill in the Peak District. The frantic ticking of telegraphs had replaced the clatter of looms. Technicians had set up a telescope on the roof, aimed at a distant, damaged tripod that had become immobilized on a hillside after a skirmish. It was stationary, yet intact, occasionally shifting its weight. Morozova watched it for hours, unmoving, a hawk studying its prey. I stood beside her, shivering in the high-altitude wind. "Jameson," she murmured, "look at the legs, the feet, not the machine." I put my eye to the telescope. The tripod was making constant, minute adjustments. A piston would fire here, a joint would shift a fraction of an inch there. The adjustments were a continuous dance of subtle, complex mechanics. "It's not standing," Morozova whispered, her eyes alight with a terrifying intensity. "It's balancing, actively, every second." An electrical engineer, a quiet man named Howell, who was instrumental in keeping our wireless network running, had come up to deliver a report. He glanced through the telescope himself. "Remarkable," he commented, more to himself than to us. "Must be a devilishly complex system to keep a thing that tall stable. Reminds me of some of Mr. Tesla's experiments with resonant frequencies. He claimed that with the right frequency, he could shake a building to pieces. A sort of mechanical sympathy." Morozova went still. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, but she ignored it. She fixed her eyes on the distant tripod, but her mind was clearly somewhere else entirely, seeing something new. The engineer's offhand remark was the key that unlocked the puzzle. She turned to me, her face pale but luminous with discovery. "Jameson," she said, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. "That's it. That's the key." She grabbed my arm, her grip strong. "We've been trying to punch through their armor. We're thinking like soldiers." She tapped her own temple. "We need to think like engineers, liquefy the foundations, and the wall collapses on its own." She looked back at the tripod, a predator's smile touching her lips. "Forget the armor. Our goal is to make it stumble." The war's greatest gamble followed. Morozova's plan was of such audacious scale and risk that it seemed more like a fantasy than a viable military strategy. Morozova proposed a great feigned retreat, a deliberate abandonment of the industrial heartlands of Manchester and Liverpool. She would order the British Army to conduct a chaotic, seemingly desperate fighting withdrawal, giving up the cities we had bled to defend. The withdrawal was a monumental piece of theater designed to do one thing: lure the main Martian column, their entire northern assault force, into a single, decisive trap. The trap was a long, narrow valley in the Peak District, a place called Longondale. On a map, the valley was an unremarkable feature of the landscape, but to Morozova and Morgan Bell, it was the perfect killing ground. A deep valley with steep, unforgiving ridges on both sides, limiting the Martians' lines of sight and movement. And crucially, heavy-duty rail lines, hidden from the Martians, crisscrossed it. Spurs built to serve the quarries and reservoirs in the area. Morozova gave the order, and the retreat began. The retreat was a masterpiece of orchestrated chaos. To the Martians, it must have looked like the final collapse of human resistance. They took the bait. Seeing our armies breaking and our cities abandoned, and sensing victory was within their grasp, their entire column, more than 30 tripods, altered course, pursuing our fleeing forces directly into the mouth of Longdendale Valley. As they advanced, an operation of incredible speed and stealth unfolded. For 3 frantic weeks, under the constant terror of Martian patrols,
Bell's crews performed a feat of logistics. This was Morgan Bell's symphony. Using the hidden rail lines, his crews worked with a feverish, silent intensity. They moved dozens of our heaviest guns, 13.5-inch coastal defense cannons, naval guns stripped from damaged ships' siege howitzers, into camouflage positions carved into the valley's ridges. Each gun weighed over 60 tons. Moving one was a Herculean task. Moving scores of them in a matter of days was a triumph of logistics and sheer stubborn will. Simultaneously, another army of engineers, led by the quiet Mr. Howell, was laying miles of heavy-gauge copper cable throughout the valley floor. The cables served a different purpose from communication, connecting to massive induction coils stripped from power stations and powered by dynamos hauled out of the textile mills we had just abandoned. They turned the entire valley into a massive low-frequency electromagnetic generator. The device was Nikola Tesla's theory weaponized on a terrifying scale. This was the Thunder Line. I watched them work, a chronicler overwhelmed by the sheer, grimy magnificence of it all. Men covered in mud and grease strained against massive levers to inch a gun into place. Others, their faces illuminated by sparks from a welding torch, connected the thick cables. The effort was the accumulation of everything we had learned. This was a battle of railwaymen, miners, and engineers, the industrial age's final, defiant roar.